Why is it that people tell me all the time they can hold their breath longer after doing the Wim Hof method? So that's indeed what people keep on telling me. I can hold my breath longer after I've done the Wim Hof method. So Gert, peace in every breath, I've seen your videos and you're quite critical about Wim Hof. So you are wrong, Gert, because I can hold my breath longer on the Wim Hof method. Well, they ain't lying. So if people, if Wim Hofers, if they tell me, hey, I can hold my breath longer after the Wim Hof method, well, they ain't lying. It is a true statement. They can indeed hold their breath longer after doing Wim Hof breathing cycles than if they would be holding their breath without the prior Wim Hof. So they're not lying. It is true. But you have to understand what that actually means. And you have to understand that this comes with a big problem. Actually, it comes with two problems. So the first problem is blacking out. You black out more easily when you're doing the Wim Hof method than if you would be holding your breath without prior doing the Wim Hof method. So blacking out is one big issue. Now you might say, hey, we all know we cannot do the Wim Hof method in the water. So we only do this dry, which is how it's supposed to be. So if we would black out on dry land, let's say we lay down in our bed. Why am I looking behind me? Because my bed is behind me. If you're lying down on the sofa and you black out, well, then you would just wake up again and there's no problem. You will not die. If you black out in the water, then you die. So that's a huge problem. But if you do it on dry land, you don't die. So that's not a problem. So that's also a valid argument of the Wim Hofers saying, yes, we understand we cannot do this in the water, so we do it on dry land. So what's the problem, Gert? What's the problem? Well, the problem is CO2 tolerance. So besides blacking out, you cannot do this in the water. The big problem with this is that when you do the Wim Hof method, you are not training your CO2 tolerance. Now, let's get a little deeper into this, right? So what exactly is CO2? So when we breathe, we take air in, and air consists of 21% of oxygen. So we breathe through the nose. I hope you're all breathing through the nose. I know you can breathe through the mouth, but that's not the good practice. You should breathe through your nose. So we breathe in air that consists 21% of oxygen. That oxygen goes into the lungs, and then the lungs, they extract that oxygen and send it into the bloodstream. So when we breathe, we need that oxygen. So every time we breathe in, the lungs become bigger. Every time we breathe out, the lungs come back to normal position again. So inflation, deflation. So the lungs, they extract that oxygen. It is done through the alveoli, which is the little lung sacs that get the oxygen from the air, transport it into the blood. And as a byproduct, we exhale CO2. So that's where the CO2 comes from. We exhale the CO2. So we use the oxygen. The oxygen is sent into the blood, and then the oxygen is released from the blood to our working muscles, the brain, our tissues, our whole body needs that oxygen. And as a byproduct of this whole process, our body creates CO2, carbon dioxide, and exhales that. So when we exhale CO2. Now, let's take a closer look at what happens when we hold our breath, because we have to understand about the relationship between oxygen and CO2. So on the vertical axis, we have SpO2. SpO2 is the oxygen saturation. So on top we have 100%. So our normal SpO2 is always between 95 and 99%. Chances are, if you would put an oximeter on your finger and measure your oxygen saturation, it would be somewhere around 98. Anything between 95 and 99 is healthy, is fine. If it's lower than 95, then there might be something going on, or you're just holding your breath, because when you hold your breath, your oxygen saturation goes down, of course. So 95 to 99%. So the green line here is the maximum oxygen saturation. It is 99%. Why not 100%? Because in nature, nothing is perfect and there's always a bit of loss in every process. So let's just say 99%. So what happens when you hold your breath? On the horizontal axis, we have the time. So we start holding the breath, and then we go to the right on the axis, right? We go to the right, and you see that the blue line is going down. The blue line is your oxygen saturation. So the longer you hold your breath, the lower your oxygen saturation, the SpO2, until we stop the breath hold, which is the blue dots. So at the blue dots, we stop the breath holds, and then we start breathing again, and then the blue line goes up again, which means the oxygen saturation goes back up again. So for this particular breath hold, you can see that the oxygen saturation is somewhere around 60-65%. That's already a pretty decent breath hold, you know, if it goes down that low. And then you go back up, and everything is fine, you know, you start breathing again. So what happens if we would hold our breath longer than this? So this is the red line. So instead of stopping at the blue dots, we now keep on holding our breath. We keep on holding our breath until the SpO2 goes down to the hypoxia limit. And hypoxia is extreme low levels of oxygen that result into blackouts. So for a normal human being, that is between 45 to 50% oxygen saturation. So if you would hold your breath until 45 to 50% oxygen saturation, which is the red dot, then you would reach that hypoxia limit and you would most likely black out. By the way, if you want to go deeper into this, go to school.com/underwater squad, which is my community where we have master classes on all of this. I'm going to go quick over this because this is YouTube. But if you want to really know all the details about this, it's all in my Underwater Squad school community. Now, let's take a look at the green line here, hypercapnia. What is hypercapnia? Hypercapnia is the highest level of CO2, carbon dioxide, that you can tolerate before you have to start breathing again. So when you hold your breath, CO2 goes up, goes up, goes up, goes up, goes up, and it starts feeling uncomfortable, but you're tough and you keep on holding your breath, and CO2 keeps on going up and it starts feeling more uncomfortable, but you are tough, so you keep on holding your breath. But at a certain point, you really cannot hold your breath anymore and you have to start breathing again. That is the hypercapnia limit. It's in green here. And if you look at the vertical axis, the green dots, it says tidal. It means we are tidal breathing as a breathe up. And tidal breathing is just normal breathing. So not the Wim Hof method, not these big breaths. No, we're not doing the Wim Hof method in this breath hold. We're doing normal breathing. Why is this important? Because afterwards I will show you the graphical representation of a Wim Hof breath hold. What is the difference there? So when we do normal tidal breathing, the process of the increase of the CO2, that is the green line that goes up. So as we hold our breath longer and longer, we will eventually reach the hypercapnic green line, which is the green dot with the arrow. So the arrow is pointing to that green dot. That is when you reach hypercapnia and you have to start breathing again. So you see that we haven't reached hypoxia yet. So if you go up from the green dot towards the blue dot, then you can see we have not reached hypoxia levels yet. So we are staying in the blue breath hold. We're staying in the blue curve. So we are not blacking out because hypercapnia prevents us from holding our breath longer. In layman's terms, CO2 is the alarm bell that tells you, hey, now I have to stop holding my breath, because if I keep on holding my breath, then I will black out. So CO2 here is your friend that stops you from blacking out. Now, take a look at the gray line, the urge to breathe. So hypercapnia is the highest level of CO2 that you can tolerate. Well, not anymore actually. And then you have to start breathing again. But the urge to breathe comes before hypercapnia. So hypercapnia is the maximum of CO2 that you can have. And the urge to breathe is somewhere in the middle. The urge to breathe is like the very first manifestation of feeling uncomfortable. So you hold your breath, everything goes fine. You hold your breath longer, and then suddenly you start feeling that, this does not feel so good anymore. That is the first urge to breathe, the first manifestation of the urge to breathe, which is usually translated as or manifested as a contraction, you know, a contraction when your respiratory muscles go like this, like an internal hiccup. That's a contraction. You might have experienced this yet. So just because you feel your first contraction, your first urge to breathe, that doesn't mean you have to stop holding your breath. Just keep on holding your breath. As you can see, the gray dot is somewhere halfway the blue breath hold. So we are not reaching hypoxia levels yet. But if you hold your breath longer, so the gray dot, urge to breathe, we keep on holding the breath. So follow the green line. Then we eventually will reach the green dot, which is hypercapnia. And then you have to stop breathing stop holding your breath anyway. So nowhere we have reached the hypoxia limit. If we do tidal breathing as a breathe up, which is the normal breathing. So tidal breathing, we call that TV breathing, or breathing like if you're reading a book. So in freediving, we talk about tidal breathing. Other people would say baseline breathing. It is just normal light breathing, nothing special, just normal relaxed breathing through the nose. If you hold your breath after normal relaxed breathing through the nose, then the chances that you will black out are very, 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 very small, almost nothing, because hypercapnia, high levels of CO2, will stop you from holding your breath before you reach the hypoxia limit. Now, we need to talk about what is hyperventilation, because now we're going to take a graphical representation of a breath hold after you do the Wim Hof method. Now, Wim Hof is hyperventilation. Let me first explain why that is, because many Wim Hofers don't understand this, and they argue with me on YouTube that Wim Hof is not hyperventilation, because Wim Hof, they say, is controlled breathing. So it's not hyperventilation. No, it is hyperventilation. People are wrong about this concept. So what is hyperventilation? Hyperventilation is breathing more volume of air per time span, let's say per minute, than tidal breathing. So when you tidal breathe through your nose, the volume of air you breathe in is more or less half a liter. More or less half a liter. So you inhale through the nose, half a liter, you exhale. You inhale half a liter, you exhale. And more or less, we will take about 12, like the average person will take about 12 breaths per minute. So if you breathe half a liter per respiration, and you have 12 respirations per minute, that means the total volume of air you have been breathing during that minute is 6 liters, which we would call the tidal volume of breathing per minute. Now, this can be more, this can be less, depending on how big your lungs are, or depending on how well trained you are in breathing and in breath holding, because the better you are trained, the less breaths you will take per minute. Some people only take like 9 breaths per minute or 8 breaths, and people who are less trained and who have bad cardio, they might even take 20 breaths per minute or more. So it depends, of course, on your person, it's an individual thing. So hyperventilation means that you're breathing more than, let's say, the 6 liters per minute. Whether that is controlled or uncontrolled doesn't matter. So this argument of the Wim Hofers, yeah, but it's controlled, so it's not hyperventilation. It's nonsense. You can perfectly do controlled hyperventilation. That is perfectly possible. If you, in a controlled way, deliberately breathe more by taking in more air, so you breathe more than 6 liters per minute, then you are hyperventilating. And that is exactly what happens when you do the Wim Hof method. Now let's take a look at breath hold after hyperventilation. So the purple dot on the vertical axis says hyperventilation. So that's the starting point of the CO2. So why is the purple dot beneath the green dot? Because when you hyperventilate, you are exhaling CO2. So hyperventilation lowers CO2, that's what it does. That's why you can hold your breath longer initially on the Wim Hof method, because you start with lower levels of CO2. And remember what I just explained in the beginning of this video, What stops you from holding your breath longer is not low oxygen, it's higher CO2. But if you hyperventilate, you start your breath holds with lower levels of CO2 already. So that's why you can hold your breath longer, at least initially. I will explain later what's the problem with this, because of the lower CO2. So we hyperventilate, we start at the purple dots, and then we follow the purple line going up as we hold our breath longer and longer and longer. Eventually, we reach that gray spot, which is the urge to breathe, the first manifestation of the urge to breathe. And as you can see, we are already way further in the breath hold than if we would be holding our breath without hyperventilation, right? And then we hold our breath more and more, and then you see the purple points. We haven't reached the hypercapnia limit yet. We haven't reached the hypercapnia limit yet, which stops us from holding our breath, but we do reach the hypoxia limit already, because the purple points is when we reach the hypoxia limits. So we're already feeling a bit urge to breathe, but not enough to stop the breath hold. The only thing that will stop us mentally from holding that breath is mentally and physically, is the hypercapnia limit. But we do not reach the hypercapnia limit because we reach hypoxia first, because our levels of CO2 are lower. And that is why you black out more easily on the Wim Hof method or any hyperventilation based method. And that's why it's so dangerous to do this in the water. Now, okay, we've already established, okay, we're not going to do the Wim Hof method in the water, so the blackout issue is not a problem for me. Okay, that's a valid argument. Let's take a look at the problem of hyperventilation with regards to CO2. You are not training CO2 when you're hyperventilating. You are not training your tolerance to CO2. If you hold your breath without prior hyperventilation, then the breath hold will become more difficult as the CO2 goes up. And that's how you train to become tolerant to CO2. But if you hyperventilate, then your body is getting used to that lower CO2. Your body is getting used to starting a breath hold with lower CO2, or not just holding your breath, but functioning in general. Your body and your mind are basically conditioning itself to function on lower CO2, because if you practice the Wim Hof method on a daily basis, then that's what you condition yourself for, right? If you write for an hour every day, you become a writer. If you practice basketball for an hour every day, you become a good basketball player. Guess what? If you practice hyperventilation every day, you become good at hyperventilating. So your body adjusts to the hyperventilation. And that's not a good thing. That's not a good thing, because your body should adjust to higher levels of CO2. You should become more tolerant to higher levels of CO2. Now, another argument from the Wim Hof method that I have from the Wim Hofers that I have dismissed already is that, yeah, Gert, but you're only talking about the hyperventilation and the lower CO2, but you forget the breath hold part. So on the Wim Hof method, we hold our breath, and that's when the CO2 gets higher. So we are also becoming more tolerant to CO2. No, because I just showed you that graphical representation. Your CO2 is always lower than if you would be holding your breath without prior hyperventilation, and you will never reach those high CO2 levels that are coming close to the hypercapnia level, and that's where is the true gold. That's where you truly train for CO2 tolerance. You never reach those levels. In fact, if you keep holding your breath longer, you would black out. So instead of reaching high levels of CO2, you would black out. So yes, if you hold your breath after the Wim Hof method, yes, your CO2 goes up, but it does not reach the levels that you will reach after normal breath holding without the Wim Hof method. And that's where is the true goal of training your body and mind for CO2 tolerance. So why do you need CO2 tolerance? Why do you need to learn to become comfortable with higher CO2? And it's both a physical and a mental thing. Because one, CO2 is a vasodilator, so the blood vessels to your vital organs, like your brain, they dilate, which means you get more blood to the brain, and blood carries oxygen. So if you get more blood to the brain, then you get more oxygen to the brain. That's why we need higher levels of CO2. The other way around, if you hyperventilate, then the CO2 is lower, so it cannot function as a vasodilator, so you get vasoconstriction. So if you do the Wim Hof method, you get vasoconstriction of the blood vessels to the brain, which means less blood to your brain and thus less oxygen. You don't want that. And the second thing that you truly have to understand why we need higher CO2 is the Bohr effect. So the Bohr effect is an effect that describes if you have higher CO2, then the oxygen that is transported in the blood will be released better to the working muscles, the brain, the tissues, than if you would have lower CO2. If you have lower CO2, the blood, actually the hemoglobin in the blood, which is the red protein that carries the oxygen molecule, if you have lower oxygen, the hemoglobin will hold on to that oxygen molecule and release it in a less efficient way, or release it less to your working muscles and your brain. If you have higher CO2, then it will release it better to the working muscles. So not only is CO2 a vasodilator that gives more oxygen to the brain, also it causes the Bohr effect to be maximal if you have higher CO2. So the oxygen can be released better to your brain, so more blood and thus more oxygen, plus the oxygen gets released better to the brain. Those are two wonderful, wonderful advantages of having higher CO2. And that's why you should learn to hold your breath without prior hyperventilation. Because if you do hyperventilation, the Wim Hof method, you do not get those two benefits, the vasodilation to the brain and the Bohr effect. You simply do not get it. So higher CO2 results actually in a longer breath hold. Yeah, you might not believe this. This is an advanced thing, of course. So as a beginner, when a beginner says, hey, I can hold my breath longer after the Wim Hof method, yes, that is true. That's true as a beginner, because as a beginner, you have not trained your CO2 tolerance yet. So as a beginner, you have basically no CO2 tolerance at all. So if you can hold your breath, let's say for 40 seconds after normal breathing, and then you do the Wim Hof method, and now suddenly you can hold your breath for 2 minutes 30 or even 3 minutes, then you might say, wow, the Wim Hof method is oxygenating my brain. I can hold my breath 3 times longer. Well, yes, you can hold your breath longer, but you're not oxygenating your brain. What merely happens is that the CO2 goes down, which takes away the urge to breathe, and that's why you can hold your breath longer to 2 minutes, 3 minutes, but eventually it will stop. You will not go much higher than that. So you will reach a plateau usually around somewhere 4 minutes. Now it can be 3:30, 4:30. I mean, usually around 4 minutes on the Wim Hof method, you will notice that you will not get much further. When freedivers hold their breath for 6 minutes, they don't do the Wim Hof methods. They don't do that because you need the Bohr effect to release that oxygen in the best possible way to your brain. Your brain needs to keep on working. So the Wim Hof method makes beginners hold their breath longer, but then it stops at a certain level, it plateaus, and that is the proof that this method does not oxygenate the body. The Wim Hof method merely takes away the CO2, the urge to breathe, but it does not oxygenate your body. What oxygenates your body is the Bohr effect and the vasodilation as a result of higher CO2, and that will make you hold your breath longer than 4 minutes. So if you want to hold your breath for 5 minutes, 6 minutes, don't do the Wim Hof method, but learn to breathe less. Learn to hold your breath after normal breathing through the nose, which in freediving we call tidal breathing. So stop doing the Wim Hof breathing method, and even if you don't want to hold your breath, even if you're not interested in holding your breath, you should still not do the Wim Hof method, because you're not training your CO2 tolerance. And even if you don't hold your breath, even if you're not interested in breath holding, I'm not a free diver and I'm not interested in this, you're still conditioning your body for lower CO2, and that's a bad thing. You should condition your body for higher CO2, which comes with a myriad of health benefits. And the two most important is what I just mentioned. And that's why in certain breathing methods, they teach you how to breathe less, which is exactly the opposite of the Wim Hof method. So guys, stop doing the Wim Hof method. Instead, join my community where we learn to breathe less. We learn how to hold our breath after normal breathing. We don't do hyperventilation. Join our New Year's Kickoff challenge, which starts on the 6th of January. You get a 7-day free trial, so you can just go in there, take a look. If you like it, you stay. If you don't like it, then you just leave again. So no pressure. So just register, join. You get 7 days for free. Start the new year right, guys. Let's do this all together. Go to school.com/underwater squad. This is how it looks like. This is the page you will go to when you type in that URL. This is the inside of the community where we have the ultimate one, the 6-week challenge, the New Year's Kickoff. And when you're done with that 6-week challenge, you have Ultimate 2, which is a breath hold training program. Then we have an exercise library. We have a breathwork masterclass, and you get free lifetime membership if you reach a certain level in the community. Join now on January 6th and learn breathwork from a freediver, which is me, Gert Leroy, peace in every breath. Now free for 7 days. Click the button, start free trial. You have nothing to lose. If you don't like it, then you just cancel before the 7 days. Guys, I see you inside.